8:38 here on the Big 550 KTRS. David Stokes with us from the Show Me Institute. Good morning, David Stokes.
Good morning, McGraw.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good. You look good. Nice, clean shaven. Nice shirt. You look good for KTRS TV.
Well, that's what it's here for.
It's about time. All right. What are your thoughts as you sit and watch the fast food strike or fast food demonstrations from last week complaining about unfair working conditions?
Well, I find it very interesting. I mean, you go back a few decades, and strikes like this were a much larger part of the economy, and now they're so rare. They sort of get a lot of press, as they should.
Right.
Personally speaking, people work for an amount that their employers are willing to pay them because that's what the market bears.
Right.
And the idea that I don't think that they should earn, of course, I think they should earn as much as they deserve to get, and that somebody will pay them.
Right.
And if that's low to start with, people there will gain necessary work experience and the job training and get advanced and promoted. I want everybody to make as much money as they possibly can. I don't support the government of the state of Missouri stepping in to raise the minimum wage and requiring companies to pay more.
You would be for no minimum wage?
Yeah, I mean, personally speaking, that's just a personal opinion. I don't believe the government has a right to tell employers what they should pay employees.
Do you think the government has a right to tell businesses 8-hour working days? 5 days a week?
Well, again, there's a whole lot of professionals and managers out there for whom those rules are sort of don't really apply. So There's lots of people in America who, while they finish the outlines of that, that doesn't apply to them generally either.
Right.
But look, I'm not here to stake out some radical ground opposed to the 40-hour work week.
Right.
I mean, that's what we have.
David Stokes against 40-hour work weeks. Film 11.
That's what we have, and that works for our economy pretty well.
Right. You don't have a problem with these guys ringing the bell and going on strike and handing out flyers saying unfair working practices?
Of course not. Well, I'm not sure that they're saying unfair working practices.
Well, I don't know what they were saying exactly.
There's a technical difference between unfair working practices, such as you're being discriminated against or harassed or not given bathroom breaks. And then that's different from a strike for higher wages.
Yeah.
And no, I have no problem with either of it. You have a right to strike and get out and stake your ground for higher wages. And companies have a right to respond to that.
Watching yesterday, taking the last few years, remember a couple years ago they had the supermarket strike where it was Dearborg, Schnucks, and Shop and Save, and that whole argument was over healthcare costs. Right, if memory serves me right, the striking workers were like, "Hey, keep our rates the same, keep our salary the same, our hourly rate the same, but hey, cut us a break on our health insurance, which is going up." Which is interesting now, looking at it through the prism of trying to now do something about health insurance through the Affordable Care Act. But a lot of those strikes were about health insurance. This strike or this day of I don't know. I don't really want to call it a strike. I don't know what it was exactly. But my two things that I took away from it was, one, every single kid should pay attention to that and say to themselves, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to get a high school diploma and I'm going to do everything I can to get educated so that I don't find myself in a situation of having to work at a fast food restaurant. Because fast food restaurant jobs were never meant to be the major breadwinner job of the family, right? I mean, it was for extra money after school, maybe an extra job or, something like that to save money for a new car, a new surfboard or something. But in this day and age, the factory jobs of the 50s and the 60s are long gone, and they were replaced by fast food jobs. So in a sense, it's the same plight of the factory worker in the 50s and 60s. That's the fast food worker today.
Well, if I'm going to disagree, I think you're overstating the people whose family income entirely depends on fast food work. There's certainly some people like that, but I think the majority of people at fast food companies are still young people, are still secondary wage earners within the family. And that's one of the reasons why economists are generally opposed to increasing the minimum wage to help poor people, because it's a very blunt instrument that doesn't really succeed in doing so. And I could point to and I will, 2 studies done for the Show Me Institute by Professor David Newmark of the University of California, but also one by Christine Romer, who until very recently was President Obama's chief economic advisor, where she had an op-ed a few months ago in the New York Times saying that raising the minimum wage is not a good way to help poor people.
Because the argument is, if you raise the minimum wage, ultimately that hamburger you're buying is going to cost more, so you're doing nothing to help the person who is living at that end of the spectrum because you're just raising prices and you're not helping them.
Well, that's absolutely one of the key arguments that Christine Romer raised, is that the same people who you need these jobs are the ones often shopping at the Walmarts or the Jimmy John's to buy. So when you raise prices on them, you're hurting the people you're trying to help. There's also the employment factor, and then there's it does increase unemployment when you raise minimum wages. The overall effect might be small, but David Newmark points out in his studies for us that while the overall employment effect, counting everybody, is small, the effect within the market for people seeking entry-level minimum wage jobs can be much higher. And furthermore, businesses might not respond by cutting employment. They might respond by cutting hours and cutting benefits to offset the increased wage increase. It doesn't really help people you're trying to help. It does help still, suburban teenagers who are still working the fast food jobs.
I don't think that majority of studies show, and anecdotally as well, shows that people don't leave jobs because they're being underpaid. People leave jobs because they're feeling underappreciated and undervalued. And if we go back to that story where the one guy's complaining because he got yelled at because he put the cheese on and then the meat as opposed to the meat and then the cheese, that's ridiculous, right? And being yelled at for putting 8 peppers on the sandwich as opposed to 5 peppers is just ridiculous. And so this guy wasn't upset that he was being underpaid. I mean, he would like to be paid more, but he really got mad when his dignity was taken away from him.
Absolutely, but you can't pass legislation that a manager can't be a jerk.
No. There wouldn't be any radio managers anywhere.
And what I would say to somebody there is that person taking that entry-level position will hopefully, and in many cases does, learn job skills and develop a resume and develop a work history that allows them, so that I hope they do leave after a period of time for a better paying job. I hope that the job training they get there allows them to be either promoted within that company or move on to better employment.
Right.
But in many cases, this is the first job opening really offered to people with the background to work the minimum wage work. And hopefully, when they do it over time, they're not stuck there. And too often in a bad economy now, they are.
Right.
And I hope we can all agree we'd like to go back to a better overall economy where this will go back to what it used to be, more fluid, more focused on young people.
What I find fascinating is just not a business owner, but somebody who frequents fast food restaurants, somebody who is dealing with these quote-unquote minimal wage earners. They're the face of your company, right? I don't know the owner of the fast food restaurant I go to by name, but I know the guy who's making my sandwich, and I know the girl who's checking me out, and I know the guy who's cutting up the meat. I'm friendly with these people, and if they're not happy and if they're not in a good mood, guess what? I don't go back to your restaurant, sir. So I don't know why you do everything you can to make these people angry. They're the face of your business.
And I think well-run fast food places, like well-run businesses everywhere, do try to keep their employees happy. But going back to the minimum wage part, like I go to a fair amount of fast food. I get a lot of lunches at either Jimmy John's or Subway in the Central West End.
Right.
And the Jimmy John's by our office makes a point for fast service. So they really staff up. They've got more employees than Subway does, and they serve you faster and like. But if you increase the minimum wage, somebody there is getting laid off. They're not going to still have 8 employees there for the lunch rush like they generally have. Subway's got about 4.
Or they're going to raise the price of the sandwich.
Well, I think both are going to happen because you can't raise the price of the sandwich very high before I and a lot of other people start going back to the Subway.
Right.
Because now the Jimmy John's is a buck more.
But the other argument is with allowing illegal immigrants to come in, you don't take that $7 an hour job. There's an illegal immigrant who's crossed the border who'll work for $3 an hour and think he's being paid $1 million. So that sort of brings in the whole immigration reform as well.
I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and I think the people who support raising the minimum wage some of them are very well intentioned. Most of them are,
Right.
but
But
it's way too simplistic, and it hurts the people you're trying to help the most.
But take this out of the fast food arena. Put it into roofing, right? My guy comes, who's a roofer, who has all the correct documented workers and everything else. His bid is $4,000 more than somebody else who's using illegal workers. The guy doing it right is put at a competitive disadvantage to the person who's breaking the law. I mean, you can sort of see how the whole labor world and the whole labor conversation really gets pretty sticky.
It does get sticky, and in a situation like roofers, where you add very important benefits to the situation, such as workers' comp costs that don't apply in fast food. Right. Nobody would ever say that we shouldn't enforce the law as
No,
it exists.
I understand. But I mean, that's an interesting. It's labor is such a there's no simple answer to any of it, I guess.
Absolutely.
Is my point. David Stokes from the Show Me Institute. Where can we hear you, and where can we see you, and how can we get a hold of you?
Well, you can see these two studies by David Newmark for Show Me Institute on the minimum wage at our website, showmeinstitute.org. And you can check out our blog, showmedaily.org. Follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes.
And I can yell at you at your email. What's your email?
Just David. What is my email? Great question. David.Stokes at showmeinstitute.org.
Have a good week. Thanks.
Thanks, McGraw.
850 KTRS.